Welcome, everybody. This is the 6th session of the 12 Days of FileMaker 12 series. Today we will be talking about container fields and some of the exciting new features that come along with that new interaction that we have with the container fields in the FileMaker 12 implementation. Our instructor today is Tim Neudecker, who's my business partner. We are here at Logic, which is a Westport-based development firm that services kind of the Northeast area. My name is John Mathewson, and I am the president of the company. Today, your campus tour is being provided by FM Academy. These are the 7 founding members of the FM Academy. We are providing information for the industry, and the FileMaker 12 series is a part of that process. I should let you know that we are very convinced that sharing this information is a valuable thing for the industry, and we are posting all of these sessions to the YouTube site so that you can follow up on any of this training material after the fact. So if you've missed any of the sessions, please go to the address shown on your screen, and you can go there to view any of the webinars that have been presented in the past. A little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions for Tim, please type them into a console. You will see that there is a question console on the dashboard for the webinar. And if you submit those questions, time permitting, we will address those questions at the end. And now I'd like to turn to our presenter, Tim Neudecker, to talk to you about container fields.
Hi, everybody. Tim here. I think I've seen a lot of the names in the list, and I know a lot of you. Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite new features in FileMaker Pro 12, the improvements to container fields. Some of the key topics we're going to talk about today is the new remote storage and streaming capability of container fields, thumbnail generation, the new validation options for when we bring in data into container fields, the layout inspector options that have changed, the new insert or improved insert file script step, and the new method of updating plugins from container fields. With the new container fields, probably the most talked about feature with them is the new external storage of data. No longer do we have to embed data into our database, bloating our files up greatly. When we go into define fields and we go to the storage options for a container field, there's a new control option down at the bottom for store this container data externally. And then we can select a base path from a drop-down menu, and we'll talk about how to change those base paths here in a minute, to tell where to store these files. And we also have options for secure storage or open storage, and we'll learn more about that in the very near future. We can also, from the Define Fields dialog box, set up validation. This is something we could not do before either. Where we used to be able to set the maximum number of characters or digits in a number field, now we can tell how many kilobytes of data can go into one container field. So if you have a database of images and you have one user who's consistently uploading 20 megabyte images when all you need is a thumbnail, you can put validation on there so if they select the wrong image, it will not let them upload that large file. When you convert a container field to becoming external storage and it's previously been internal storage, FileMaker Pro is going to need to move all the data from the old location to the new location that you've set up. This transfer could take quite a bit of time if you have a lot of container fields or very large pieces of data in your container fields. So FileMaker Pro gives you an option to back out of your changes and not do that transfer if you don't have time to let it take place right now. When you convert a container field to being externally stored, you need to specify where it's going to be stored with the dialog box we were just talking about. You have to allow FileMaker Pro to move the data. And after you move the data, you really should review the log files that FileMaker Pro generates, and we will walk through reviewing those logs during the demo phase. And then you really should close the file and reopen it. When you close the file after taking a container field from being internal to external, FileMaker Pro will do some file maintenance on the file and reduce the size of the file so you can regain all of the disk space that was being taken up by those container fields. When you go to external storage, your containers are going to be in a folder structure, and that needs to be treated just like your database. You need to back it up. You need to keep it safe. And if you use relative pathways, not absolute pathways, you need to make sure you move it with the database when you move the database around and work on it in different places. There is a new containers option from the File Manage drop-down menu that allows you to manipulate the base directories where you store your container fields. You can simply come in here, and it's very similar to setting up external data sources. You set up a pathway, and you tell FileMaker Pro where you're going to place all this new data. One important thing to remember about managing containers is you can only do the base directory management and changes while a file is in single user mode. Let me repeat that. You can't change or edit base directories while a file is hosted on server. You have to stop it on server and make these changes in single user mode. When you're making a new pathway, there are 4 different ways you can set up a pathway. You can set up a relative pathway, which is based off of where the file is stored. So you can give a new directory name. In this case, it would make a directory called Files, sitting right next to where the database is. And inside there, we would have a folder called Container Sample. And inside there would be all of our files that we've uploaded to that container field for all the records in our database. We could also give a full pathway where we mention a volume name, the list of volumes. In this case, you see it from a Mac, and the directory name where you want. So it's an absolute path. And that way you can move the database wherever you want, and those images will always be stored where they are. And that pathway doesn't have to be on the same volume as your database when the file is in single user mode. You could specify a drive letter if you're on Windows and place them on an external drive or a thumb drive even. Or you could use a UNC pathway for network path and place it on a file server or a SharePoint and have all that container stuff maybe stored on a Drobo on your network somewhere. When you place files on the server, though, you can only use relative pathways. The server will not let you use absolute pathways. Also, when you're working with the storage for your container fields, you can set up the thumbnail generation. And you don't have to have FileMaker Pro generate thumbnails. You can just say, hey, always send the high-res image or the full-size file when somebody opens up that container field. But if you want to reduce the amount of network traffic and also make your layout scroll faster and everything work faster, you can have the server generate thumbnails for you. While this will take a little bit of CPU power from your server and a little bit of disk space from your server, I think the reduced bandwidth and WAN performance increases are well worth it. Now, there are one option you can pick when you turn on the thumbnails, and that's whether you want to have permanent storage or temporary storage of these thumbnails. If you're worried about drive space and clutter on your server, you can opt for the temporary option, and these thumbnails will be deleted every time you close the database file. If you say permanent, it will remember those thumbnails and it won't have to render them again the next time somebody uses that container. When you're working with a server with externally stored container fields, you upload your databases and download them just like you would with the FileMaker admin console. The folder with the base directory with all your container fields will move with the file, so you can bring them right down and right up to the server using the console. The server will create and use the same base paths as it uses when it's on local on your machine. You, remember, cannot edit those base paths while it's live on the server. The server will use port 16,000 for streaming. And this is rather curious. Streaming is very important. It can really speed up a user's experience when working with the system. It lets a movie file or an MP3 file or a PDF file start being used before the whole file is downloaded. Similar when you go to YouTube and you start watching a movie, you know you haven't downloaded it all. You can see the progress bar going across where it's still downloading, but you can start watching now. You don't have to wait for the entire movie to download before you start watching it. But if you turn on SSL communications on the server, this will override and prevent streaming. And the reason for this is SSL is happening on port 5003, the normal database communication port. And when you turn on SSL, your streaming would not be encrypted because it's on a different port. So it no longer streams, and that container data is sent over the port 5003 through your encrypted channel. So if you require encrypted communication, say you're in a WAN environment, you will not have streaming capabilities. So that means users cannot flip through PDF files while they're waiting for the rest of the pages to download and that kind of stuff. So you have to decide whether performance or security is more important for your solution. The new script step, or I should say improved script step for insert file, really gives us some great new capabilities of restricting what users can do and making it easier for users to set up. Let's look at a little bit more detail about this. When you are selecting a file that the user can insert, you can actually name the dialog box now. So in this case, I've named it Select a PDF. And you can also set up a filter where maybe you only want to see files that fit a specific naming convention or have a specific extension. And you can have more than one filter so that different files would show up. Maybe you only want to import images that begin with the word Nikon underscore so that you find specific images. You can add that as a filter, and that'll help the user find the files that they're looking for when they do their import. You can also now control whether the user is inserting that image or storing a reference to that image. And before, you couldn't really lock this down, and the user could change it and mess up your whole database structure. You know, you think all these images are embedded, and they're not, and they're all references because one user's been clicking reference when they do the import. Also, you can decide how that will be inserted into the container field, meaning will it go in as a binary blob and it will just show an icon with the file name, or will they see the content? Will they actually see the picture as opposed to just an icon of a JPEG image? Also, you can control whether or not FileMaker should try to compress the content that's being uploaded. Say you're sending a very large Word document. FileMaker Pro will compress that when it stores it on the server to make the transfer over the network faster. So you can select whether or not to compress the file. And FileMaker is smart enough not to try to recompress things that are already compressed. So you won't be wasting cycles and CPU power trying to compress things it can't compress. A feature that goes with container fields, it's been around for a long time. I don't remember working, I think FileMaker 8 or 7 it was started, and it's the file import folder command. And this lets you import entire folders of files where each one will be its own record. And this is wonderful if you have large CDs from various photographers filled with images, or databases of Excel spreadsheets, a whole folder full of Excel spreadsheets. You can import them all at once and suck them right into your database. And we'll actually see an example of how this works. When you do that kind of import, you get a traditional FileMaker import dialog box. And you'll notice that there's a few fields that are in there, and these are legacy fields that are importing when it imports an image. You used to generate thumbnails when it did the import. It still does, but you'll notice I'm not importing the thumbnail because FileMaker 12's new container fields can generate thumbnails for me if we turn on the thumbnail option that we talked about earlier. There's some new options for layouts in container fields. Of course, we have the traditional alignment options in the inspector, but below them on the Data tab, we have a new option for optimizing how a container field is displayed. And what the difference in this, and we'll demonstrate this, is whether or not the user can use the contents of the container field while it's still in the container field, or they have to export that container field if they want to work with it. In this case, if you were to upload a PDF, do you want the user to be able to flip through the pages of that PDF while it's in the container field, or do they have to actually right-click on it, export the contents of that field, and then work with it on their desktop to work on it? And so that's actually what the streaming is. So we're optimizing for streaming or without streaming. And remember, streaming's using port 16,000. This is new use for this port in FileMaker Pro Server. It only works if your database is hosted on FileMaker Server. So if you have peer-to-peer sharing from FileMaker Client to FileMaker Client, you will not get streaming or interactive content on a layout. And it does not work again if you turn on the SSL from server. So again, you have to weigh the pros and cons of security versus convenience. And don't confuse this with secure storage. Remember, the SSL is network communication. It's when server is talking to client, is that communication channel encrypted? It's not when the file is at rest on the server, is that encrypted? When we had our storage tab, when we're doing our field definitions, we can decide if we want secure storage or open storage, and we will see a demo of this when we get to the demo phase. But that is very different than SSL encryption. You can have secure storage and do streaming. They are compatible and they work together, and I highly recommend you use the secure storage, and if at all possible, you use the SSL on the server. And again, streaming, it takes a little more oomph from the computer. It takes some power, some cycles. It has to think a lot. So it's disabled if you put a container field in a portal. So streaming will not work. No interactivity for container fields in portals. The last, well, not the last, but the next and last thing I will speak about today, great feature with container fields, is that they have added a new script step that will allow you to install a plugin directly from a container field. This means you can have a single script step install and activate a plugin in FileMaker Pro 12. You do not need to know how to use the auto update plugin. You do not need to know how to tarball or compress properly or install the plugins on the server in special folders. You simply place the plugin using the insert file command into a container field, and you use the new script step, install plugin, and the plugin is placed on the user's machine. To help this new script step, we were also given a new get function called get installed FM plugins. This function will return a return separated list or value list that has 3 elements in it separated by semicolons: the name of the plugin, the version number, and the enabled state of whether the plugin is turned on or off, which the user can control in the FileMaker Pro Preferences plugin tab. So, and we again will see a demo of this. So here's what the script step looks like when it's all configured. You can see it really is that simple. It's one parameter, and that's the name of the container field that contains the plugin. And when it runs, it goes. We've had a lot of clients over the last few weeks ask us about this new externally stored container fields in FileMaker Pro because they're currently using SuperContainer. We're big fans of SuperContainer. There are still some things that SuperContainer can do that FileMaker 12's container fields cannot do. With SuperContainer, you can store files anywhere you want. You are not stuck to the relative pathing going down from your live files on the server. They could even be on a separate server from your database server. So if you're dealing with large archives of images, in the hundreds of gigabytes range, you can place them on their own server, so your bandwidth and your drive space on your FileMaker server are not being taken up by these container fields. Also, you can upload images with the web, and SuperContainer can do SSL streaming encryption. So if you do need streaming and encryption, you can still do that with SuperContainer. And of course, SuperContainer works with FileMaker 8.5 through 12, basically anything with a web viewer. That ends the slide portion of the presentation. What I'd like to do now is drop out of PowerPoint and go through the practical application of some of this and actually show how it works. And I'm going to start with a simple FileMaker 12 file that has a container field with lots of files in it. And we're going to look at the database. And it's very simple. We have one container field. We have our primary key. If we open up the container field and we look under storage, we can see that it's not stored externally, and I only have one repetition. I'm going to go ahead and turn on external storage, and I can choose, and I'm just going to pick the default pathway, which means, hey, right from wherever the database is, make a folder called Files, and then make one folder for this field. This field is called Container, for the file Container Sample, And I'm going to use open storage, and I'm going to store my data there. And of course, this is based off the calc engine, so you can control that pathway any way you want. Once you have access to the FileMaker calc engine, you can do anything you want. So I'm going to say OK here, say OK here. And now here's the new dialog box that pops up. It's basically saying, hey, you want to move this data from within our database to this new directory you told me about. And I know I only have 8 images, so it's not going to take too long. So I'm going to say, yeah, go ahead and do it. I say transfer. It happened. It transferred that quickly. And this is the button I want you to pay attention to and make sure you always hit. After you've done the transfer, hit that, and a text file will open up, in this case right here for me. And we're actually paying attention to this area of it. This is earlier conversions. They share log files. And I can make this wider. And we can see that this transfer happened very quickly. We've got our timestamps there, half a second, actually less than half a second. 0 errors, 8 items transferred, 0 items skipped. So that's what I want to see, 0 errors and 0 items skipped. So I know all of my data successfully moved. Now we're probably going, gee, where did it move to? Well, let's take a look. Let's say, okay, well, my database looks the same. All my files are still here. Let's look at our folder. Hey, a new folder has appeared next to our database. Files, just as we specified for our root path with the container sample path. And there's our field, container field. And there are all the files that were stored in those container fields, now stored relative to the database within the file system. If I move these or change them, they will disappear from FileMaker Pro. It will lose them. So don't muck with these files once they're here. Treat it like a database, like it's that one file. And the best way to prevent that from happening is to make your file storage secure. And we'll see that in the next demo. But I want to show one more thing. I want to go into layout mode and select this field and show the data formatting. Right now, this is formatted for images, JPEG, PNG, BMP. Let's make it interactive media. And now let's go back into browse mode. And notice what happens. I can now see the Acrobat PDF, and I can actually flip through the pages of that PDF. I've got my scroll bar. So now it's interactive. So we can do what we want to do. And that's the joy of streaming and having interactive media. Now, you can have interactive media that is not streaming. It's just the user has to wait for the content to download before they can work with it. So if you're doing small files and you're on a fast network and they download quickly, not a problem. Keep that SSL on. Okay, let's move on to our next demo file. And we're going to make that file secure. So we open this up. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do the one we just did. That one has a lot of images in it. I don't want it to take too long. So I'm going to open this one up. I'm going to go Command-Shift-D. We're going to go into that container field. And I'm just going to change this one option to secure storage. Say OK. Come down here, say OK. And we get the transfer box again, which says, hey, this is going to take a while. We're going to convert and encrypt all your data. And I'm going to say, OK, go ahead and do it. And FileMaker Pro will crank through it. And it's using AES 128-bit encryption. And it's encrypting all of those files that we had stored on our drive. And again, we can open our log file. And we can see the last entries down at the bottom, 0 errors, 0 items skipped, 8 items transferred to secure storage. That's what I want to see. And then I say OK. Our FileMaker Pro again looks the same. We can flip through. We can still interact with our PDF files. All that good stuff. But when we come back to our file structure, and I go into Files, Container Sample, we now have secure instead of field names, and we have these encrypted folders. And you'll notice there's more than 8 folders where we had 8 images before. FileMaker Pro spreads them around all over the place in different file size chunks so that side channel attacks are reduced. What that means is people cannot assume, hey, this file is about 800K, it might be this kind of file. This file is 2K, it must be one of these. So it eliminates some of that metadata mining that could be done if somebody got a hold of this information. So all your data is encrypted, again with AES 128-bit while it's at rest, which is absolutely wonderful, and I highly recommend you keep that turned on. That will keep indexing software from finding those files and people moving them by mistake. It's just because it really is just another database for you, just it's controlled with a folder structure. And it's that easy to encrypt our data. So let's close that one up, and let's talk about how does this work with server. So we have our database. Again, it's the same one with the 8 images that we had before, but I'm going to log into my FileMaker Pro server right here. Give me 1 second. Whoops. Where's my mouse? There it is. Helps if I admin is straight tour. We log into our FileMaker Pro server, and we can go to databases, pick our live files folder here, and come down to the bottom, say upload database, perform action. I'm going to place it in the live file, add database, desktop, upload me, and I'm going to hit select, next. FileMaker Pro scans the files. It makes sure we will have room on the server when we upload the file. And yes, I want FileMaker Pro to open it. I hit next, and it uploads that file along with all of its container fields. And when we hit next, we see everything happened well. Hit finish, we see the file is hosted and normal. But let's see what's really going on in the background. If I go to my server and I look in the live files directory, I will see there's the database I just uploaded, and we have all these fields out here now. Remote container data, convert, files, container sample, and there's all those files. There they are. And even if they're on server, I can open up the find fields now and switch that to secure storage, and then they'll be stored securely on my server, which is what I recommend you do. But this demo file that I just uploaded from was not secure storage. Now, the great new feature in FileMaker 12 Server, I could also now download that file. In this folder, you'll notice I have no databases. I come in here, I can select my database, I can close it, perform that action, it stops that file, and now I can download that file. Boy, I wish I had this a couple years ago. I love this feature. I absolutely love downloading databases. I hit perform action. I tell where do I want to put it. I'm going to put it on my desktop in the download me folder. Hit download, and now it's bringing down that database and all of its container fields. And if I get this out of the way and we look in the download folder, there it is, convert. And there's all of our container field data. Let's talk about the new Insert Me script step. Insert File, as we talked about, has some great new features to help us manage the dialog box. In this case, I have select the PDF, and I set up a filter, star.pdf, so the user can only select PDF files that they want to insert. And I've said, hey, only let the user insert files. Don't let them use references, or you can select let the user choose what they want to do. And I'm going to keep it to insert. I don't want folks using references now that we have externally stored data, because in a cross-platform environment, that can be really difficult to manage. And I want to show the content of the file whenever possible, so I actually want to see the image. I don't want to see an icon that tells me there's a JPEG there. And if possible, I want FileMaker Pro to compress that data, save some disk space for me. And these two commands, target field and source file, are exactly as they were before. You can give a pathway to where to do the import from and what fields you want to import the data into. So we'll leave those alone. I'm not going to save any changes I made. And so we'll come down here, we'll make a new record, and I will run that script step. And when it fires, you'll notice only PDF files are highlighted. I can't import any other files. And this list would show your filters down below. And so I'm going to pick this one right here, and I'm going to say Insert. And FileMaker Pro inserts our cheat sheet. For anybody doing algorithm analysis, this is a great PDF. And there it is. And since I said, hey, make it interactive, we can actually do work with it right here. So that's the insert script step with its new filtering. Our next option is the import folder. I'm going to go under the File menu and say Import Records, Folder. And I'm going to say Picture of Movies, but where am I importing from? Let's go back to our desktop, Import Folder, and I just happen to have a folder full of images. I will choose it. And this is whether you want to navigate the entire directory structure below that folder while you're importing if you have subfolders. In this case, I don't. And you can also tell FileMaker that you're bringing in text files and you want each file to go into a separate field as opposed to looking at a text file and importing the rows. So I'm going to say Continue, and we get the traditional import dialog box. I have my fields already lined up. I'm going to say Import. And I'm going to say Auto Perform Options. I'd like to have serial numbers on these records. And it runs. Again, I got 8 files with no errors. And there we go. I just quickly populated my database. Now notice I had 2 extra fields I've created in this database. This one is the pathway from where the file was imported. And you may want that to do some kind of analysis. Maybe you know what folder it came from. You know how to set other descriptive fields in the database with calculations. And you can also get just the file name part if you want to work with that after you've imported it to help you organize the information. But the import folder can really help you populate databases instead of writing complex scripts to an individual file movement and stuff like that. If you just need to bulk import, it's great. In our last demo today, we'll be installing a plugin in the FileMaker Pro. And this one is so easy, I didn't even make a demo file for it. What I'm going to do for you is actually go to FileMaker Pro and make a new database. Install plugin. And let's place it in this folder right here. And I'm going to go into Define Fields. I'm going to make one field. Container plugin. And I'm going to make it a type container. And I'm going to say Create. And we're going to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to make one more field. I'm going to make a list of plugins field. And I'm going to leave it type text. No, we're going to make it a calculation, create. And I'm going to go get that new get function. Installed FileMaker plugins. I'm going to make the field type text. Do not evaluate. And for storage options, I am going to put do not store. And the reason I'm doing this is it's a get function, and every time it renders on screen, I want it to reevaluate so I can get new information should it change. So with those 2 fields, we'll go to our form view. I'm going to go down, make my new record, and right here we're going to go Edit, to insert file. You have to use the insert file, not picture. And I'm going to grab 360works Script Master plugin, one of my favorites, and we'll get the Mac version. And I'm going to stick this in a field in my database. So maybe you have a utility table, and all the plugins you need for your solution are stored in that utility table. Notice this field recalculated. Let me make that field a little bigger. And we'll anchor it here and here. And now we can see that that calculation is telling all the plugins I currently have installed on my computer. And you'll see that I have 360works Script Master right here, version 124. And the version I have in the field is 132, so it's actually a newer version. So you could write a calculation. Maybe you have another field that tells what version is in that container field, and you can do a simple if statement. If version in container field is newer than version installed, install the new one. So how do we actually do that installation? Well, we have to write a script. So I'm going to say install, and it's down at the very bottom of our list down here. Install plugin file, and it has one option, the container field where the plugin is stored. And that's it. That's the only scripting you have to do to install plugins. And I'm going to run this script, and look at that, my field updated. I now have version 1.32 installed and enabled. So it's that easy. Now the real fun with this is that script step is server-side compatible. So you can automatically update and install plugins on your server for your server-side scripts. No longer have to log into the console, set up the update. You don't have to install anything on the server. You don't have to move the plugins to the server, know where to put them, know what the permissions are. One single script step, run it in a server-side script, and the server will be updated. Just make sure your plugins are server-side compatible. Okay, so that wraps it up for the demo portion of today. And what I'd like to do is bring back up our slides.
Okay. Tim, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Whoa.
Okay,
Sorry.
so let's so as we mentioned, we've received quite a few questions during the session, Tim, and I'll give you those as we move forward here. If anyone has any further questions, please feel free to type them into the console and send them to us, and time permitting, we will attempt to address as many as we can. I do want to remind you about the next session, and that is this next Tuesday, May 1st. It'll be on design surface behavior changes, and having worked a lot in this area myself, there's some very exciting changes that have taken place in the actual layout and design surface, and I encourage you not to miss this. And also remember, if you do miss a session, you can always go to YouTube, where the FileMaker Academy has a channel, and you can obtain information there. So I'd like to maybe start off, Tim, with a couple of questions, and we've got lots of stuff that came in here. So first of all, I'll start off. There were several people were interested to know if you're aware of the behavior if you're using peer-to-peer sharing. Do you know when you're trying to store containers and you're using peer-to-peer sharing, does the hosting FileMaker session act like a server, or does it behave more like a FileMaker client?
Great. It behaves more like a server-client metaphor, I do believe. I would have to thoroughly test it, but I believe the files are stored with the host file, and they get pushed back and forth. I mean, you shouldn't have to do any different programming. Unless you're using absolute paths, this is why I recommend you use relative paths. If you use absolute paths, both users, both the hosting user and the client user, need to have access to that absolute path. So if you're using an absolute path and you're storing images on an external hard drive, if that user does not have access to that external hard drive through the same pathway, mounted on the same drive letter or same SharePoint name, they will not have access to those container fields, and they won't see them or be able to create new ones. Okay, thank you. Asking about now, a question here about converting. So if someone has converted a file from the FP7 format, and they want to bring it in, and they want to know if they will have this interactive ability with their container fields if the fields were created as a result of the conversion. Yes, you will have to go into your layout mode and turn on the interactive content, because the default view is for static data, images, PNGs, JPEGs, GIFs, but you can turn on the interactive in the layout once you've moved to the 12 world. Okay. Question about server. If you are putting the FileMaker on a NAS, how does FileMaker work with the permissions in terms of making sure that you can store files that are uploaded to it? This is very similar to the first question about peer-to-peer sharing, because to store onto a NAS, which is basically a different location than where the file is being shared from, you have to use absolute pathing, so the file cannot be shared from FileMaker server if you're going to store them on a NAS. It'll have to be single user or peer-to-peer sharing, which I highly recommend you do not use the peer-to-peer. But both users or all users will have to have access to that absolute path no matter where it is. So and whatever their user permission is what they will be able to do when they're doing this single user. Remember, if they're doing it off of a server, it's the server's permissions to the server's own drive, so everything just works fine. So best bet is try to avoid that situation and use FileMaker server.
Okay, and there's a question, similar question, which was more from a data security. Is there anything built in, or is there a strategy for making sure that someone doesn't intentionally go in and try and manipulate the container files, thus corrupting your database? Is there any way to do that?
Yeah, don't let the people have access to your server. Security is only as good as the physical security to where your database is stored. This is why server racks and server closet rooms have locks and keys. If somebody can get access to it, they can corrupt it. And the same is true when we store data internally in our database. If a user went to a database that was being hosted and tried to copy it, move it, change its name while it's running, they would corrupt it and damage it. So if somebody has physical access to your files while they're being hosted, all bets are off.
Okay, thank you. Are externally managed container files, are they backed up in the regular FMS backup schedule?
Yes, they are. And this can make a backup take a long time. Of course, a backup would take a long time if they were stored internally and you had a large database as well. But FileMaker has developed a new backup strategy called progressive backups to address this and help this go faster. And we have a future FM 12 days session coming up. I believe it's Colin O'Keefe will be doing that presentation on server data and storage, and he'll talk more about the secure storage at that time, as well as the backup structure and how to restore and review your backups.
Thank you. Is the new insert file script step that you showed, is it server compatible? Can it be made part of a server-side script?
I don't know the answer to that. I would
I
assume
can tell you, no, it's
yes,
not.
it can be,
No,
but it will only be able to draw from the server documents folder because the server only has access within that data structure on the server. I will find out and try to get a blog post on that one, but that would take some testing to confirm.
Tim, I took a second to look at that because I didn't know myself, and the script step is not server compatible.
Great, thank you.
I heard that you can now drag and drop a file onto a container field without paying a storage penalty like you used to in the earlier versions of FileMaker. Is that statement accurate?
Well, you still have to store the data. Where you're saving space now in the storage penalty is the data is not stored in your database. It's stored in this new folder structure beside your database based on that base folder. But if you have a file, it has to be somewhere, and that has to take space.
One gentleman has a system that he needs to store aircraft illustrations, and he wants to store them in different formats. Is there any ability within the new container fields to specify formats that things are being saved at?
Yes. If you remember the insert file command, we could specify what file extension. Remember, all the demos I did today involved JPEGs and PDFs, as they're the most common thing people store. But if you had CAD drawings or any other file form, even FileMaker Pro files for that point, you can embed them into container fields now. And with the insert field script step, you can script your own dialog boxes that will only permit users to insert files of that specific type. Now, if they're not of the common file types, basically things you can see in a web browser, you won't be able to interact with them within a container field. So if you have CAD drawings, you won't be able to view them and see them more than likely. But you can embed them, and you'll see their icon, and you'll see the name of the file in the container field. So yes, you can do that.
Okay. I think you addressed this, but I'll ask it. Is it possible for someone to store, go to the network store location for files and drop something in there, and will FileMaker recognize that?
No, FileMaker will not recognize it because it has no pointers or pathways stored within the database to know where that image or container data is and what record it's tied to. So you really should not go into those folders on the server where these images are stored. That's purely for the server and the database to work on.
Okay. Just a few more here. Does the install FM plugin script set, does that require any administrative privileges to run, or can that be run with other types of user privileges?
Other user privileges, anybody can run it as long as they're able to run scripts within your database. They can run that. When plugins are installed in that method, they're stored within the user's documents pathway. So they don't actually get stored in the application directory. So if you're in a large corporation, you do not have admin privileges on your machine, or your users don't have admin privileges where you would normally install plugins within the application folder. By storing them at the user level, we get around all of those admin privilege problems. So the users can store their own plugins, multiple users of the machine can have their own sets of plugins, and it just makes it much easier. And that's where they go when they're stored automatically with the install plugin command.
Okay, Tim, this is a question you and I discussed beforehand, and we might need to get back to people on. But if a file is originally stored as a reference and it's converted to FileMaker 12, does FileMaker automatically use the external storage?
You're absolutely right. I do not know the answer to that question, and we will get a blog post up. We were truly talking about that before the session. We didn't know how it worked, and we didn't have time before it came up to figure it out, but we will test and figure that out.
Okay. Are your demo files available for download?
I don't see why not. It's really a file with 2 fields. I'd be happy to post it. There's not a whole lot there to see, but I'll be happy to post them on the blog post, yes.
Okay. And this will be our last question, because we're getting quite a few questions, and some of them are overlapping. So I think we'll if you store a file such as an Excel file, an XLSX file, and you store it in a container field, what are your options for opening that file?
You can right-click on it and export the contents of that field, and then open it. And if you make edits, you'll have to reinsert it to put the edited version back into the database. The container field only knows how to talk to some of the basic file formats, and it's only read-only access.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Tim, for answering all those questions, and thank you, everyone, for attending. Tim, maybe you could go to the next slide. There are some ways to get a hold of us, and we will try and make postings for some of these other questions. Several of the questions that we did not address, they were fairly detailed, and we kind of need to know more. So if you'd like any follow-up information, please contact info@Keologic, or if you're trying to reach any of the other FM Academy members and don't know how to reach them, please feel free to contact us. We would be happy to point you in the right direction. We also post on Twitter, and there is a blog where we post things such as demo files, etc. And you can also go to the FileMaker Academy website where there are blogs posted as well as links to the videos. So there's lots of ways in which you can follow up these sessions. Tim, next slide. And so these are the members. As you can see, they're located around the country. They cover pretty well most territories in the country. Again, if you're looking for help and don't know who to speak to, if you contact us, we'd be happy to guide you in the right direction. So Tim, do you have anything else? If not, then I would like to thank everyone for attending.
I'd like to remind everybody this will be up on YouTube in the next day or two, so if you missed something or came in late, catch it there, send your friends to it, and join us next week, I believe, for the next presentation.
Next Tuesday. Great. Thank you very much for joining us today.